So Hugh Napier is the locomotive that is owned by the National Trust. Used to live at Penryn Castle, but has been with us for the last 10 years, and we are the custodians of it here at the FR. So this year marked 9 years since the locomotive had its overhaul and was brought back into traffic. Amazing how time flies. And we knew that the tubes in the boiler were getting pretty thin, particularly at the smoke box end. So rather than try and get that last year's ticket on it, and because we're not using the engine very much at the moment, or couldn't in this year, we decided that we would use the funds that had amassed through the envelopes that had been collecting money for Hugh Napier on the train to do the overhaul. And so, although we'd originally envisaged this being a volunteer project, we've actually used our paid staff largely to do the work on it, supported by the Loco crews during the summer who were on standby doing various bits of cleaning work on the engine. So what's happened? Well, in just 4 months, the boiler has been taken off, the boiler was detubed, inspected and retubed in fairly short order. The chassis has required quite a considerable overhaul, and we've taken the opportunity to do that as well. So I'll just go through some of the things that have happened. For example, the crank pins down here and rod ends, as the engine was, when it went round corners or when it was used on a heavy load, the engine was loosening on the rod ends, and we're having to knock them up and keep the wedges tight. So there was something fairly basic wrong in there. So we've taken the crank pins out, made new ones, slightly larger, which meant that we've been able to reuse the old rod brasses, and we've re-quartered the engine. So the axles have been trued up, they've been re-quartered, new crank pins, tyres turned. So the wheel sets on this engine are now just spot on. And then we've built back from that, sorted out rod end bushes, crossheads, slide bars and so on. So the engine is now square and in really good shape. Probably the best it's been for a very, very long time. For those of you who remember, we also helped do exactly the same work for Winifred, which now resides at the Bala Lake Railway, and that investment in doing the axles and crank pins has proved really worthwhile for them, and I'm sure it will with Hugh Napier as well. So at the front end here, Hugh's smoke box was terribly thin, and it really had to change this time. So what we've done is we've made a new smoke box, this time out of stainless steel. For fairly obvious reasons. That means that it won't be rotting away anytime soon, so it will see us out. However, it is to the riveted design as it originally carried, because Hugh Napier is an authentic historic loco, and we want to keep it that way as much as we possibly can. Although we have, as I made this change to stainless steel instead of mild steel, so hopefully that will see us out. It's fitted with a Master Mechanics front end in here, so it's got spark arresters of the best quality, so it's suitable for use in even the severest of hot weather restrictions when we're worried about line-side fires. Also to mention at the front is the chimney, which is rather amusing actually, because the chimney had rotted away, and it was also, like the smoke box, was very thin. When we went to King's Cross with Hugh Napier a few years back, it wouldn't fit through the door into that station. So at that time, what we did is we took the chimney cap off, we shortened the chimney by 4 inches and put the cap back on so that it would fit under the door at King's Cross. We've now righted that wrong. We've had a piece of tube made, 7.5 inches in diameter, and re-extended to put that 4 inches back on and the cap put back on again. Amusingly though, with the tube, because it's a special size, we could only get a 3 metre length of it. So we've got enough for a couple more quarry Hunslets should they need it. So Hugh Napier now then had its steam test, is fit to go. It was tested in the second weekend in December. It's come back in, it's had its valve set, be out for another test this coming weekend, and then it'll be in traffic back as normal. So I'm really pleased to say a 10-year overhaul funded by our supporters, putting coins in envelopes on the trains, and thank you to the guys who go around putting those envelopes out and collecting them all up for us again, and the Society for processing those donations. So thank you for that, but thanks to your effort, Hugh's with us for another 10 years, good to go, and we look forward to seeing you around in the coming months. This is the replacement boiler for Velen Heli, which is, I guess, a Saturday mornings kind of project, a little side project that we're working on. It's been 2 or 3 years now that we've been working on this replacement boiler as funds and time permit. You'll see now that the boiler shell is complete, and you'll notice the spray marking here from when the welds have been tested. Delighted to say that the British Engineering surveyor has been along to look at the boiler shell, has approved the welds, Bob Yates's excellent work, and we're now on to the next stage, which will be to put the boiler together, get the inner firebox in, crown stays on, and so on. So probably still a year away before we've completed this at the pace we're going, but no doubt work is well underway with Velen Heli's new boiler. You can follow the progress of Velen Heli by going onto Facebook. If you search for Velen Heli, there's a special page dedicated to it where we give updates on progress. So if you'd like to like that page, that would be very helpful. So the double Fairlies are quite difficult for us to get at to show you at the moment, but David Lloyd George is tucked away just here. So the double Fairlies have seen little in the way of use in 2020. They started the season having had their winter maintenance and were ready to go, and both of them have done just 3 or 4 days in traffic. So what we've done with them now is that as soon as the service finished at the end of October, we've stripped the double Fairlies down. They've had their annual boiler exams early. We've put them back together. They've had their steam test, and they are now ready for the 2021 season. So no matter what happens, if we need them, we can just pull them out and light them up without worrying about annual inspections. And that inspection will take us right through into January of 2022. So double Fairlies, winterised now, all been cleaned out, smoke boxes and fire boxes cleaned out and sprayed with wax oil, rods coated with wax oil as well, so they're tucked away in the shed. And it's very important that we have done this because, as you can see on prints here, the condensation that you get on the side of the engines in this weather is really quite something, and can cause a lot of problems with corrosion. So we've protected them as best we can. Moving now to the England engines, they've clearly been the star of the year, haven't they? And who would have thought that we'd see 3 England engines in traffic during the course of 2020? Now, in speaking about each of them, a lot has been said about Welsh Pony, of course, engine of the year. Everybody's been following the progress of Welsh Pony. It's done incredibly well. We're very pleased with it. It's now winterised in the Heritage carriage shed, waiting its next turn of duty. It's in ticket, it's got its annual ticket until well into the middle of next year, so we'll use up the boiler ticket that it's got before we give it its next annual inspection. But I'd like to say a few words about 2 other engines as well, if I may. One is Palmerston and the other is Prince. Palmerston was in a pretty bad way at the midpoint of 2020. It's gone many years without having had a chassis overhaul, although it's had its annual and 10-year boiler overhauls. It was knocking, there was problems with the crank pins touching the crossheads, and frankly it was really not fit for traffic anymore. So the Festiniog Railway Society had quite a considerable chunk of money in a fund dedicated to Palmerston, and we've used those funds to pay our staff this summer to work on the engine and to bring it back into good order. And so I'm pleased to say that Palmerston has gone back into traffic, really has performed very well once we got it operating, and is fit for next season. Prince, dear old Prince, bless him, Prince has also seen a lot of use this year. And I couldn't help but notice that the crews were reporting it knocking and banging rather. And as you stood at the side of the track and watched it went along, you could see the crosshead moving in the slide bars. So some fairly heavy wear was beginning to kick in there. And I'm delighted to say that in September we managed to pull Prince for a couple of weeks, and we did all that maintenance work on the crossheads and the associated rod ends to put it back into good condition. So Prince's chassis is pretty strong, and it's performing well. I've had the chance to drive it since that work was done on it, and it was great to feel it in such good condition. However, we are nearing the 10-year boiler overhaul with Prince. It's not far away, and there's probably one or two tubes that are starting to shout at us to say that they need some attention. So we'll be looking at that early in the new year, and we'll make some decisions about what we do with the locomotive. But as I say, the 3 England engines, it's been their year. Hopefully we'll see more of them in 2021 with some more Tannerbulk shuttles, but what a pleasure it's been to see them in traffic. Loco 87. 87 has been in traffic during 2020, and in fact it's been the only one of our Garretts that's been in traffic during this year. As soon as we finished the season and we knew that we had no more trains to run, the guys at Dinas have taken the engine apart, and we've given it its annual boiler exam so that we knew that was all done and dusted, ready for the 2021 season. So boiler exam complete, and now we're just working on some maintenance issues that have also arisen that we want to get sorted out so that we know that as we go into the 21 season that this engine's first out and ready to go. So that's the boiler. If we move down the front here, you can see some of the things that are going on. So you'll notice here that one of the rods is missing, the main connecting rod, which goes from the crosshead here down to the crank pin here. And the bush that goes in this rod has started to move in the eye, so the guys are making a new bush for it. That'll be pressed, fitted in, and then fitted to this crank pin. Only take a couple of weeks, and this will be sorted. So minor maintenance work, but also there's a joint here on the cylinder between the gland and the piston rod, the joint here that leaks. So while we've got all this apart, we'll be taking the time to get in here to replace this joint so it doesn't leak. These are a really difficult thing to get at while the engine's in service because there's so much to take off to get to it. But nonetheless, we have to do it. So it's an ideal thing to get in the winter. Once we get to the spring and the service starts, it's the devil's own job to actually get at these things, and we often carry minor leaks like that right through the year. So that's Loco number 87. So boiler test done, some minor maintenance work to be done, and then we'll dry it out and put it in the shed, and it will sit there waiting for the beginning of services in 2021. This is locomotive number 130, which is sponsored by Peter Best. It's been the subject of a major overhaul that's been taking place for about 4 years now. As I was preparing to come up to Dinas today, I was just checking some images and some information, and I found that 2 years ago today, we're talking to you now on the 14th of December, and 2 years ago today, I got a photograph of the locomotive out in the yard here with the boiler in place and the tank, cab and bunker going on for the first time. There's been 2 years of hard slog from that point to where we are now. And where are we now? Well, we are that close to steaming. The boiler has had a further hydraulic test to reset the clock so that our 10-year boiler certificate starts now rather than 2 years ago when we had the boiler built, and so we can get 10 years full service out of the engine. So the clock has started ticking. We're that close to steaming. There's a few pipes left to go on. There's a bit of work being found that's needed on the brake shaft. Shane is making some new parts for the blow-down valve mechanism. And that, and Danny, who we'll segue to in a minute, and he will explain to you about his injector pipe. So there's a lot of work going on. We're very close. Probably just need a few bits of fabric arch and so on, and then we'll be able to put a fire in the engine. As I say, that close, and look for the news in the new year as we put this locomotive out on test.
This is the driver's side injector pipe. I'm just currently cutting it and fettling it to length. So a little more at the top there, look.
So this boiler is the one that came from Australia, given to us by the Puffing Billy Railway, and has been fully overhauled at David Wright's place, Locomotive Maintenance Services at Loughborough. This is something that has been going on for the last couple of years, and there's been various updates on it. This boiler was destined to go in locomotive number 138, but COVID has really affected us this year in our ability to keep up with our production plans. So we have now changed our plan, and this boiler will be going into locomotive number 143. And I'll talk a little bit about 143 and 138 in more detail when I'm stood alongside those. But the change is new boiler, 10-year overhaul, all ready to go, now going into 143 rather than 138. So this is Loco 143, and 2020 has been rather challenging for this locomotive. When we started the year, it was with 1 year left on its 10-year boiler certificate. So it's last year in traffic, which we knew about and we'd planned for. So it was due to have its steam test on the day we locked down back in March of 2020. And it was all ready and all warmed up, but the boiler inspector couldn't come along to do that at the time. And so we returned to this in the summer, when we then went to do another steam test on 143. We did that test, but then found we were unable to use the locomotive. Why? Well, because the boiler inspection regimes have changed. It used to be that we could complete a locomotive and then the clock would start ticking in terms of its 10 years from the day we did the first steam test. That has changed now, and we have to start the clock ticking from the day of the hydraulic test. And the hydraulic test can take place several months before steam test, which can be a bit of a challenge for us. Then at the far end of a boiler's life, when it gets to the 10 years is absolutely 10 years. It can no longer be extended. Whereas previously, a boiler could be at, say, year 9.5, have an annual exam, and would then go to 10.5 years before we withdrew it from traffic. Now, 10 years is 10 years from the hydraulic test to the day when it comes out of service. So we've lost some flexibility. And we've been working towards this with our boiler insurance inspectors to go from the old regime to the new. With 143, we got caught up in that in a little bit more detail. And so it was agreed that we could use 143 for this season, provided it was given an additional hydraulic test. However, there's a lot of work involved in that, and because there were very few trains to be pulled, we allowed 87 to shoulder that burden, and we kept 143 in reserve, which was the right decision in the end. So 143, despite having been steamed twice in the year for inspection, never actually ran in 2020. But the Loco's in good shape, just needs a replacement boiler or a 10-year overhaul. So what we've decided to do is, rather than do a heavy overhaul on 138 and reboilering now, we're going to change our plan, and the new boiler that is ready to go, the one that I've just been pointing out to you, will now go into locomotive number 143. So that will be a boiler exchange only, which limits the amount of work we have to do on the engine, and which should give us 3 Garretts in traffic as soon as reasonably possible. It does, however, mean that the locomotive 138 will receive the boiler that was destined for 143 and indeed was carried by 143 10 years ago. That will now end up on 138, but that's only halfway through being rebuilt at Israel Newtons. So a flashback now to 138 in the days when it was running, which is just over a year or so ago now. And we made the decision with 138 that because it needs a considerable amount of work doing on it, that we will now put that in traffic after 143. This is just a direct result of COVID. And so what will happen now is, once 143's work is well underway and 87 and 130 are in traffic, we will then commence the heavy overhaul of the 2 power units from 138. Now this is important because those power units, once overhauled, although destined for 138, could be used under any of the other engines should we have an emergency. It's one of the benefits of having Bayer Garretts with fairly common components, fairly standard components. So that work will start in the spring of 2020 and should take about a year to overhaul those power units. And at the same time, as funds permit, we'll be working on the replacement boiler for 138. And I know it's difficult to track which boiler went where, but that boiler, being overhauled at Israel Newtons, is the one that was carried by 143 in the first seasons of service, or the first 10 years of service here on the Welsh Island Railway. It has, of necessity, been a quiet year for our NG15, number 134, but there has been some work going on, and our machinist at Dinas, Andy, has been working on the axle boxes to get them to the final sizes that we want, ready for wheeling 134. So here are the axle boxes, all finished and ready to go into the chassis. And when we get a bit of a gap in our programme with the Garretts, the next step will be to put these axle boxes on these wheels and to lower the frames down onto them. That should then mean we've got a moving chassis, a rolling chassis, which will make it much easier to move things around the workshop and make it a lot easier to work on the NG15, which will hopefully now see more progress in 2021.
Right, here we've got the wheel sets for the lid. This is one of the first bits we've done in the overhaul. All the obviously all the wheel sets have been taken out of the Loco. Axle boxes have been dismantled and checked. We were pleased to find that the white metal linings on the axle boxes were in good order, so they didn't need remetalling or remachining, and also the horn faces on the axle boxes were good condition, not much wear, so they haven't needed much work, just cleaning up. The wheels themselves tyres have been remachined after 10 years of running. There's a bit of wear there, but not too bad. But anyway, they've all been remachined, which is the normal process after that sort of time. The pony trucks over there also have been apart and the bearings checked out, wheels reprofiled again, but no major problems. And anyway, those bits are all ready to go back under the engine. So this is the lids boiler, which at every 10 years steam loco boilers have to be fully stripped and examined as a statutory requirement, and this 10-year period is what drives the major overhaul periods on the loco. Just the effort to strip out the boiler and take out all the tubes, which is necessary for the boiler inspector to have a look inside. There's so much dismantling, it means that it's time to overhaul everything else as well. Anyway, the boiler's here. As you can see, all the small tubes and the superheater flues have been taken out. There's lots of empty holes there. And the boiler inspectors had a look at it, but also we've had to do some extra testing on the boiler. So if you'll notice, there's a few numbers dotted about all over the plates inside and out, and those are ultrasonic thickness measurements on the plate, which we've done. Basically, that's to give us and the boiler inspector a picture of what wastage has occurred to the plates, either on the fire side or the smoke box side, or from the water side. There's always going to be a little bit of wastage going on. The plates get a little bit thinner. Anyway, having done that thickness test, all was good. There's no major wastage or damage anywhere on the boiler, so we were pleased with that. One of the other things we've had to do is have some more non-destructive tests on the weld seams on the boiler, because it's a mainly welded construction with some riveting. But on the welds, every 10 years we have to do a proportion of the welds have to have a magnetic particle test. That's looking for cracks in the weld or next to the weld, and also an ultrasonic test. The ultrasonic test can look through the plate deep into the material to see if there are any cracks there, and the magnetic particle test is a surface test, and it finds any cracks that have broken out to the surface of the metal. So if we have a look down the boiler, you can see all the seams have been painted white, and that's where the magnetic particle test has been carried out. But again, there's no problems found, so the boiler's in good condition basically. So the next step is to replace all the small tubes and the superheater flues, and those are on order from our supplier, and they hopefully should be with us in early January, and we'll be able to retube the boiler. And then the next phase of that is a hydraulic test out of the frames, again witnessed by the boiler inspector, so you can see there's no major problems with leakage or anything like that, and then boiler can go back into the chassis. So this is that's the main seam that's of interest every 10 years. You can see here this area's painted white. That's to show up the magnetic ink will be pulled into any cracks that are found there. And the This welded seam down here has been done similarly, but again, as I say, there were no faults found, so that's a pass for that. Right, the 10-year overhaul of the boiler means that at this time, with the boiler out, we can get a lot of the bits on the chassis that normally are not really accessible, because obviously the water tanks and cab all have to come off to get the boiler out. So now is the time to look at all the mechanical bits that you can now get at. And one of the things that we have done is to do some work on the cylinders. We knew that there was some minor damage on the slide valve faces, which are in here. That's caused by a lubrication problem the Loco had a few years ago, and the valve faces were slightly damaged. Anyway, the only way really to remachine those faces, which are inside here, is to take the cylinders off, put them on the boring machine in the machine shop and reface them completely. Now that's been done, so both these cylinders have been off, sorted out, and the whole lot's now been reassembled, ready to go. So that bit of the chassis overhaul has been done. The other bits that have been worked on are all the major mechanical bits, like crossheads here, piston rods, these valve spindle guides. They've all been off, checked out, set up again, and they're good to go. The other things we've got is the main Loco driving springs, because they can only easily be got out with the boiler off. They've been out, they've been crack tested, carefully looked at. We've not found any problems, so these have been painted up and they'll be able to go back in when we reassemble the chassis before the boiler goes in. Right, in this area here, this is where the Loco firebox sits, and at the bottom of that is the ash pan, which you might not think is that critical a part of the locomotive, but actually it is. The ash pan obviously collects all the ash dropping from the fire grate, and on the original design of the Loco, the access to for ashing out, which has to be done a couple of times a day at least by the firemen, access was very poor. It's restricted by the stretcher running across there, and it could only be done either with difficulty from a pit or awkwardly working, crouching down on the ground somewhere down here. So we've taken the opportunity, once the boiler's out, to redesign the ash pan and improve the access for ashing out. So what we're going to end up with is some side doors to the ash pan in this area here and down here, which at the moment are rather cluttered up with bits and pieces, but we're going to move some of these things like this pipe work. What that will mean is that from a Loco operating point of view, particularly the fireman's point of view, the Loco will be much easier to service. It'll be much easier to keep the ash pan clear, which is important, because if the ash level builds up too high in the pan, it can cause problems with steaming, burning of fire bars. So it's an important area, even though most people will never see it and be quite unaware that anything different is going on. We hope it's going to improve the fireman's lot in looking after the lid quite a bit. Okay, so as I said, we're waiting for the new boiler tubes and flues to arrive, and they promised for early January. So that will mean that work can crack on, get the boiler back together. In the meantime, we've designed the new ash pan we've just been talking about. That's got to be made. Then really, it's a matter of reassembling the Loco. It can go back on its wheels, put the ash pan and the boiler in, and then everything else can go back on, tanks and cab. There'll be a lot of work in doing things like overhauling cab valves and safety valves and things, and some of that's already been done, so they'll bolt back on. So we're hoping to have lid back in service early in the season next year. Exactly when that will begin, we're not quite sure at the moment, but we're basically, yes, hoping to have lid operational for the main running season next year, which will give us 2 double engines, this one and lots of smaller engines, all available for FR services.
Well, interestingly, Lilla's had rather a good 2020. Last year she had a 10-year boiler overhaul, and we were steaming her and using her in the very early part of 2020 before the lockdown. But as lockdown came, we've taken the opportunity to try and fit the new injector that we've made here at Boston Lodge and Dinas. I say Dinas, the machining work was done at Dinas by Andy Bird. This has taken rather a long time. It's taken a couple of years to get patterns and reamers and drawings together for the injectors. Why? Because Lilla's original injectors were very old indeed. They're original Hunslick pattern injectors that are quite rudimentary, no moving parts inside them, and they don't restart easily or indeed self-start easily. The fireman side one was giving us cause for concern because although it would work, it pumped water in at a heck of a rate. It was very worn, it had got a very large choke size, and so once it had picked up, it would pump water in very quickly and knock the pressure back very quickly. So we decided that we should try and make some new ones. And we have. We made a new pair. And thanks to Peter Jarvis, who has helped us and sponsored that programme of work. So we made the new injectors. It's something that we've rarely done at Boston Lodge, making injectors from scratch. And I'm delighted to say that finally we've got the injectors on, or the injector on the left-hand side on and working. The other one is still okay. But we have made a spare for the other side that's ready to go on should we need it. So we first tried the engine back in about August with the new injectors on. We've taken several goes at taking it on and off to modify it, and it does now work. It's just the way it is with these kind of injectors that there's no easy way to try them other than to steam the engine up, try it. If it doesn't work, you've got to let the pressure all go away, engine cool down, take the injector off, modify it, try again. So it's a pretty drawn out kind of process. However, as I say, we've got it working. And what we've learnt is that in creating original Hunslick style injectors, that these ones work just like the old ones did, i.e. they're very delicate, very touchy. You really have to have a knack to make them work. And they don't like restarting if they do kick off. Just one of those things. But with a bit of patience, you can make them work. And the engine has been used pretty much every Saturday on works trains throughout the autumn, quite successfully, and indeed will continue to do so during the course of the winter. So these are the flat pack components for James Spooner. Feels a bit like we've been to IKEA or built an Airfix model kit or something, doesn't it? James Spooner has not made much progress in 2020, not much physical progress, or there has been work on the design continuing. The boiler is ready now to go into the into the frames. But we've been concentrating work in other areas, notably Hugh Napier, work on Prince, Palmerston and so on. But also we've been working on the Pickering carriage for the Welsh Highland Heritage Railway and a third carriage for the Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway, which is just behind me. So as we move into 2021, we'll be working on the big diesel for the Welsh Highland Railway, Carnarvon Castle, which needs a new cab, and also we'll be working on James Spooner, which we should see some significant progress on that in 2021. Well, this is Linda, and Linda and Blanche have both been active this year, and again working the Tanner shuttle services, which have been so popular. It's been particularly pleasing this year to see that Blanche has had the trim in the cab finally completed when Paul Martin made the brass band that goes round the turret that has been missing since 2003, 4, something like that, when we put the new boiler on her. So thank you very much to Paul Martin for doing that. It makes the engine look a whole lot better. So thank you for that. Linda comes into the would you believe it kind of category really, because would you believe Linda's due her 10-year boiler overhaul. It's, say, 10 years in March of 2021. And Linda will have to go out of traffic, will have to lift the boiler and do whatever work is necessary. Now, I find this quite a shock to my system because it's 25 years ago when I did my first locomotive project, which was Linda's 10-year overhaul in 1995. And we've come a long way since then. The engine's had 20 years in traffic, or near on 20 years, and 6 or 7 years out of traffic in that time. So, a long time in traffic, done a lot of miles again, actually, quietly, and now quite a lot of work is needed on Linda. It's not just a pull it out, do the boiler and put it back job. So what's needed? Well, Linda carries the oldest boiler in the FR fleet, dates back to 1936. Has a lot of old metal in it. There's been many patch repairs to it over the years, and we're going to have to look very carefully at the boiler this time to see what work is needed. At this stage, we have no intention of replacing the boiler, but rather we'll repair the one that is there. But we're expecting many hours of our own fitters working on Linda's boiler to get that back into service. As well as that, we really do need to go through the chassis. There are places on the chassis which are riveted together where we can see the rivets and bolts with rings of rust around them. That means they're working rather than being solid. So we'll be looking very carefully at that when the chassis is stripped down to work through and make sure the frames have all been thoroughly worked through, are in good condition, re-riveted and so on. And then of course there'll be the usual need for dealing with the motion and so on. I expect quite a bit of work to have to be done on the smoke box again, because with coal firing the smoke boxes do take a hammering. You get condensation in there which mixes with the soot and forms an acid which can eat into the metal. So probably got quite a bit of work to do up the front end. But importantly, in the rear end, a new tender chassis is needed. For many years we've been thinking that Linda needed a new tender. The story of the tender is well known. It's Welsh Ponies tender originally. It's been widened slightly and put on a different chassis over the years, but the water space has rotted through, so when you fill the tender tank up now, the water leaks out into the coal and onto the tender floor. And also we have challenges keeping the wheel sets in good condition and in good alignment, and the springs in the correct place. So the time really has come to deal with Linda's tender. We'll probably build a new chassis and use the original upper that's already here but it will basically be new on the inside and old on the outside. I'm afraid the time has come. And so where we are with Linda is that we're looking at a fairly major overhaul, and I think we'll be talking about something in the order of £60,000 to do the work that's necessary on this engine. In the winter edition of the F&WHR Railway Society magazine, you'll see a piece about Linda in there, written by myself, and also an appeal for the engine. What I would like to say to you is you may be thinking at the time of COVID and all the challenges that we're going through, why fundraise for a Loco? Can't it wait? Well, the answer to that is that in order to make sure that our railway is sustainable and to make sure that Boston Lodge continues to be able to do its work, we need to keep our staff employed. So if we can pay for Linda's overhaul from this appeal, that will help the railway and help Boston Lodge Works to keep going and to keep the skills that we need here in Boston Lodge. So if you are able to this Christmas, we'd be immensely grateful if you could donate to the Linda appeal. It really would be good to go into next year knowing that we can plan to do this work on Linda next summer. Thank you.